Hi, my name is Titration, and you've seen me in such fine, quality, epic chemistry educational videos as acid and base, they're opposites of each other, and how do we titrate acids and bases? Do we drop the base and drop the acid at the same time? Today we're going to be looking at the idea of titration. It falls into that area of, we talked about pH and pOH in class. Yeah, I know, the bell's there, but I'm still going. Okay, titration, it is a process. It is a process that is used in the lab, but it's also used in everyday life as well. So titration is a process, okay? And we try to find what's the concentration of an unknown acid or an unknown base by comparing it with an acid or a base that we already know the concentration for. That's right. So titration, okay? So it's going to involve a base, okay? And it's going to involve an acid. Okay, so titration is a process where we're looking at base and acid. Now there's a couple of terms that we need to be familiar with, and one of those is something called the standard solution. All that the standard solution says is, look, this is the acid or the base we already know the concentration of. Okay, so the concentration is known. That's the idea behind the standard solution, okay? But the concentration's already known, and we are going to compare it to the base or the acid, depending on what we're looking at. Now, there is something else. We have to go, and when we're titrating something, the idea, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about concentration, okay? Moles, molarity, which is moles over liters. And if you don't totally understand that, check out my previous video. It is on the molarity playlist where we talk about molarity and moles and liters. I'm assuming that you guys already know that here. So, that being said, ladies and gentlemen, so what we're doing, if we have a standard solution of the base that we know the molarity, then we need to figure out what's the molarity of the acid that we don't know already. That's the basic idea. And the idea with that is that we have a certain volume of our standard solution and compare it with a certain volume of our unknown solution. But how do we know? Because oftentimes acids and bases, they tend to be clear liquids. How are we going to know? How are we going to witness a change that we'll see? Well, there is something called an indicator. Now, an indicator is a chemical. It's a chemical that will change color in the presence of certain concentrations of acid or base, depending on the kind of indicator that it uses. Now, I like universal indicator because that's one that can change color as you're going up the pH scale, going toward the base, or going down the pH scale as you're going toward the acid. But then, of course, the question comes down to is, all right, well, with an indicator, it changes color, there's different kinds of indicators, but how am I going to know when the base and acid, how do I know when it's titrated the right way? Well, we're going to look at strong acids and strong base for this. And in this case here, we have to have something called an endpoint. We have to have something called an endpoint. Now, the endpoint, the idea is that the moles of acid will equal the moles of base. Specifically, the number of moles of acid will equal the number of moles of base. That's when you know you get to the endpoint. Now, in the case of a strong base, strong acid, which is what I'm doing for my Gen Chem and H-Chem guys, okay, that endpoint's going to have a pH. Now, in this case, the pH is going to be a 7. Why 7? Equal moles, equal numbers, if you will, of acid and base to go with it. Okay? So that's the idea behind titration. It is a process that using a known concentration of an acid or a base, we call that the standard solution, we put in volumes of it and volumes of our unknown concentration of an acid or a base until we get to an endpoint. But we get to the endpoint because we need to use the indicator that will change color to let us know that it's there. Okay? Now I mentioned earlier that in the video that it was about the real world. Well, where in the world would you have something like this in the real world? Well, if you're talking about a spa or a jacuzzi, for example, because a pool is much larger in volume of water, but when you're talking about a spa or a jacuzzi, that's a little bit different. Okay, and the idea behind that, you want to have a pH of 7, because if it's too low or too high, when a person gets in, their skin is going to get very irritated, it's going to start burning, and that's just not a fun situation. So they do sell testing kits where you actually test out the water, you look at the color to see if it's at the correct pH. That is the real world use of titration outside of a chemistry lab or outside of a medical research lab. Hey, I hope that this was informative. I do have other videos that will come up dealing with titration problems. Until then, my name is Ty Trey Shun. Have a good one.